All right, I think we are live. Greetings, everybody. I wanted to welcome you all. Thank you so much for being here today on this Thursday, November 17th, on this very important and historic launch of the book by my dear friend and the indomitable Thenmozhi Soundararajan. I'm so incredibly honored to serve as an interlocutor today, along with one of the greatest public intellectuals and thinkers of our time, Dr. West. Thank you for being here, Dr. West. And yes, and I've had the pleasure to work with Thenmozhi for years in the struggle for caste annihilation and for making this world a better place. And I have to say, it's been quite a ride, and I know there is so much more to come. And today, as we go into this very important conversation, I want to invite everybody to listen from a place of settledness, to be present, breathe in, to be present with ourselves, with our ancestors, and also the dreams of our future generations. And as I listen in today and speak, I allow myself to feel the deep connection to my ancestors and also with the continuity with those that will come after us. And I also want to invite people, I don't know if people can see it, but I have I'm going to light my candle, and I'm doing this to honor those ancestors, especially our anti-caste ancestors. So if you have one candle near you, you can do that, or you can light it virtually. So today, as we continue our struggle, we remember Dr. Ambedkar, we remember Jyotiba Phule, we remember Savitribai Phule, we remember Guru Ravidas, Ayankali, Periyar, Jalkari Bai, and many, many more, and countless others who were not with us because of caste atrocities, Rohit Vemula, Inder Megwal, and those who we remember and those who remain unknown and known only through their place of struggle and passing, from Hathras to Kailanji. So let's remember those, and let's start our conversation today about honoring them. Before we begin, for those who may just be introduced to this issue of caste, I know there are many people who have seen Thenmozhi's book and have been told about it and may have just been coming into this conversation about what caste is and what caste system is. So I want to make a few things clear. Caste system originated from and it's part of South Asia and has been sanctioned by what we know as Hinduism today. But today, caste system is found in all the faiths and that are present in the South Asian subcontinent. Brahmanism, which is a spiritual philosophy and ideology which was formed in South Asia thousands of years ago, has become the dominant religious ideology of what we know today as Hinduism. And this Brahmanism created this caste system. And it is justified by many Brahmanic religious scriptures. Some of you may know them, like Bhagavad Gita. Castes are often, in India, they're called jatis or varnas, and they're identified through a hierarchy, are classified according to the four varna system or four caste system. Brahmins are the top, then there's Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, and Dalits and Adivasi are actually outside of the systems, and Brahmins occupy the topmost level in this top hierarchy. A person is born into their caste, and that caste determines their occupation and status in life. And it is a graded division of laborers. And we'll get into this labor question today during our conversation with Thenmozhi as well. Over thousands of years, Brahmanism has done this usurping of cultures into its fold by appropriating many richly diverse indigenous spiritual practices and traditions of oppressed castes, especially Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi communities, and creating what we know as today's Brahmanical form of Hinduism. And this is where we continue to be today, as we stand witness to the resilience and the thousands of years of resistance of caste oppressed people. So we'll begin with asking some questions to Thenmozhi, and then we'll bring in Dr. West, who has graciously agreed to offer some thoughts and wisdom for us. So Thenmozhi, thank you so much for writing this book. We are so grateful for it, and for your work and for your love. I wanted to start by the first question. The book, as its name suggests, gives us offerings of feminist meditations inspired by your Buddhist practice, which really emerges from Dalit people's rejection of the caste system. And you talk about the right to claim embodiment as a practice to treat the soul wound of that the caste system has created. You're really getting deeply into the questions of how do we center embodiment practice, which looks at where historical and the present trauma lives in our bodies and how we can heal. And how you talk about how this embodiment practice has helped you both as a philosophy, but as a spiritual practice. And speaking of people's rejection, Dalit people's rejection of Hinduism, Dr. Ambedkar's own conversion and mass embrace of Buddhism of 300,000 Dalit people in 1956 was a rebellion as much as it was a spiritual home. And it was a turn to one of the oldest indigenous spiritual philosophies that stood as a direct challenge to Brahmanism. So I would love for you to talk about this a little bit. Why this offering? Why these offering of meditations? What's the importance of centering emotional wounds as you do? Of course, you do the political and economic also, but why is this embodiment of these meditations a crucial framework for you? And how does it connect to you to the way that Dr. Ambedkar and hundreds of thousands of Dalit people, the way that they embrace Buddhism as a practice to heal their trauma and hope for the liberated future?
Oh, starting right out the gate, Prachi, huh? I think one of the things that I just want to share with everyone is that my heart is so full as I answer these questions. To be surrounded by beloved community at this time, it's part of actually why I wanted to write this book. Because like everybody during the pandemic, I was just bereft. I felt we opened 2019 with our homelands going into genocide. And then we saw unmentionable catastrophe with the pandemic. And then, of course, we saw the uprising and then a coup. And if just one of those things is enough to tell you we have to do things differently. But all three of them, plus my mom falling ill at this time period, made me say, I just can't be going from rapid response to rapid response. I have to stop being a firefighter, and I need to think about what does it mean for our people to be architects of our future, because our future does not feel like it's in our hands when we're going from one disaster to another. And I also think there was a place of deep pain, especially after years of organizing. And Dr. West, I know you and I have talked about this, is that, when you are doing this work, when you are committed to creating beloved community in the face of oppression, those bad guys, those people, those bigots who are, do not have a handle on their own trauma will come for you. And they will put us into a cycle of violence and repetitive mass atrocity if we don't have the courage to step away and say, there is another way. Not just for us, but there has to be another way for our children. And especially watching, the things I'm still haunted by is seeing all of those funeral pyres of all of the dead bodies that happened in our community after COVID. We will never get those people back. And I was also thinking about the thousands of people that are political prisoners right now, simply because they wanted to fight for a secular vision of our homelands. It was tremendous. And I really thought it was time to actually step out of the cycle of violence and to sit. And Buddhism, you talk about what it means to sit. It's just you don't focus on the external to find that connection to that which is limitless and that which actually can free you. And so I think that's a big part of what my intention was with this book, was to think deeply about the things that had shaped me around caste and also consider the ways things change when we are embodied. And embodiment is not a term I think we use a lot in Ambedkarite circles, but I really learned a lot from other Black somatic abolitionists like Resmaa Menakem and Ruth King and Rhonda McGee and Adrienne Marie Brown and Prentice Hemphill. So many Black liberation thinkers have really gone the circuit of, okay, here's us talking about the intellectual process of white supremacy. We have books, we have webinars, we have all these things, but nothing changes because there's something about the way systems of oppression wire the nervous systems of the privileged and the oppressed to basically be in this like really difficult wound together. And so we need to actually start with the body in order to be able to heal. The body is as crucial a text as our mind is, as the policies that we change, but we do not go down to that level when it comes to caste. And so in learning from those incredible thinkers, I thought about what would change if we actually started this conversation about, let's just center Dalit Bahujan healing. And you never hear Dalit and healing in the same word, in the same sentence, because a Brahminical society can't actually conceive of a healed Dalit Bahujan or caste oppressed person. So for me, if we actually center our healing, everything changes about the course forward, from our movements to the ways we're thinking about policies, because we're slowing down enough to understand the tremendousness of caste stress and caste harm that caste oppressed people are carrying without any support. And also the complicity and the fear that caste privileged people have around avoiding that. And so when we start to hold this together, we start to look at what I call the caste soul wound, because a soul wound, as talked about by Eduardo Duran, another really beautiful Indigenous healer and therapist, is an intergenerational wound, a wound that goes back down your lineage that has to do with these structural violences. And so in their context, he was speaking about the Indigenous genocide that really has shaped the settler colonial nation that we're here today. But Brahmanism also inflicted a soul wound on our peoples for many, many, many centuries. And we're not even given the dignity to be able to speak about it. And just even thinking about writing this. And again, Professor West, I had talked with you about it. Prachi had talked with you about this as well. It was terrifying to write the truths in this book because I knew the violence that it would invite. But I also knew that it would open beloved community. Because if we can give witness, empathetic witness to each other around this wound, that's actually what begins the healing process. A wound gets better when you open it up to the air and you tend to it and you let it come out to the surface. The gaslighting, the silencing, the denial, all of these things come from the nervous systems of the caste privilege because it is too much for them to actually consider how much violence has been done in their name. But doing this work at the embodiment level, as well as being committed to movements of solidarity, we actually are building greater tolerance to be an authentic intercaste relationship with each other. And again, we are doing this because we don't want more violence to happen in our name. So for me, this book was really about an attempt to make a pivot when people are feeling such despair and feeling so without hope. My small, humble contribution was this set of meditations that I actually really deeply felt and went through and talked with the ancestors and people I loved and cared about, to be able to try to find an opening where people feel like there isn't none. And if there's one thing that Dalits know how to do is we basically know how to make, nothing into something and find a way where there isn't a way. And that's what we have in common with so many other BIPOC communities is that, the resistance has made us so resilient and our imagination is such a potent tool for our freedom. That's really what I was hoping to ignite in each of the hearts that are here today and for our readers who read this book.
Well, thank you so much. I think that is so important in thousands and thousands of years of having been, or your culture being appropriated, the way you practice healing also being taken away from you, to kind of bring that back to being present with yourself and with each other and with the community, and bringing the community together with this extremely openness, and the love that you have shown in this book is just really tremendous. Thenmozhi, I really want to thank you for that. And speaking of this caste being this graded division of laborers, right, and what that still means to this day, I think you really beautifully chronicled in your book, and also show in your day-to-day work, right? Like in the work that you do with equality labs and the organizing that you have done across the United States to fight for Dalit communities. It illustrates that labor rights, right? This fight for labor rights struggle is intrinsically connected to anti-caste struggles, right? You talk about the lumber mills in Canada, the labor trafficking violence in temples and the construction site, and to the Silicon Valley struggle of the community. And this is not a new struggle, right? Like Dr. Ambedkar was a labor minister. He was not just the drafter of the Constitution, he was also the Minister of Labor. And even in the 1920s, one of the main struggles he took up was the labor rights struggle, right? He was working to support the workers in the textile mills in Bombay, who were facing tremendous, all of the workers in the textile mills were facing tremendous oppression from the capitalists. And he was trying to bring in all of them together to work in a multi-caste and intercaste struggle around labor rights. But even within that struggle, there was a division of laborers because of caste, and it was hard to unite them. And he really tried to do that. And so I think that's what you're trying to do as well. And I just would love to hear a little bit more from you, that, more about what you've written in the book. Talk us through this historical trajectory that you explore in the book, and of the labor rights struggle that is so central to caste struggle today.
Sure. Well, I think one thing that is really important for people to know is that caste equity is a workers' rights issue. And this is so crucial to understand, because fundamentally, when we're talking about so many of the ways that caste manifests here in North America, it has to do with workplaces. And I know that when we first did our survey in Equality Labs around documenting caste discrimination, the data was very shocking to us. 1 in 4, Dalits had experienced physical and verbal discrimination, 2 out of 3 workplace discrimination, and 1 out of 3 educational discrimination. So that path of data really reflects the legal history and the long ways that ever since South Asians came here, they started to articulate caste. And the thing I always think is so interesting is that one of the first workplaces that we found South Asians in was actually in the Pacific Northwest, where we had Punjabi workers who were working in lumber mills. And through the archives of Anita Lal's family, we know that her great-grandfather experienced caste discrimination right there with the workers there, because they wouldn't allow him to eat at the same table and to sleep at the same same area. And it took a manager who was dominant caste, who saw that segregation, to actually say, no, we're going to desegregate this workplace. So that's a very important lesson for us to know, because while we know caste discrimination has been here for at least 100 years in North America, we've also seen intercaste resilience and movements to stop it. And that's a really important piece to kind of look at, especially because there are dominant caste people that choose to behave badly around caste. And there are movements where people are in alliance with caste oppressed people for our freedom. So another really big, interesting moment around caste really had to do after these racist immigration laws that were passed at the early 1900s that only allowed white immigrants to be citizens. So what was the response? response from, dominant caste immigrants? Well, there was two cases, one with, Bhagat Singh Thind and A.K. Mozumdar, and both of them made the argument that because they were upper caste people or dominant caste people, they were basically brown white people, and that they would not ever mix their blood with people of lower caste. And so, Bhagat Singh Thind even went so far to say he would support miscegenation laws. So that's a really powerful history also in our movement to talk about, because South Asians often take an anti-Dalit mindset and make it an anti-Black mindset. And, and that lesson of the rat race that we learned from the caste pyramid, we translate to our racial solidarities or lack thereof in our communities. And so I think that one of the things that's so important around South Asian American identity is that caste oppressed people are really critical to include in our formations of power, because when we're centered, we actually make sure that we're in right relationship with other movements and other communities. And I think when we kind of jump forward to, the 2000s and the beginning of the tech era, we start to see very, very bread and butter discriminatory cases that come from dominant caste people bringing their caste practices to the industries here. So in the city of Berkeley, you had a guy named Lucky Bali Reddy, one of the largest landlords in that city, traffic over 300 workers, including 20 young Dalit women, to be his sex slaves. And one of them died, and that's how he was held accountable. But before then, it was totally fine. Everybody knew it. And even during the very difficult litigation that occurred during that period, hundreds of letters came from dominant caste people and organizations not supporting the young girls that had been trafficked, but actually supporting him. And that's really the growth that we have as a community, is that there's so many things that we see by dominant caste people who are in power, that they are totally okay with trafficking and wage theft and these kinds of terrible situations, because it's always the thing that they've known before. And they're also very comfortable with, going around the rule of law. So some of the other cases that we've seen, especially in the last 2 years, the state of California had to sue Cisco Corporation because a Dalit worker there experienced a caste hostile workplace. And this included experiencing slurs and demotions and being siloed for their work. And, there was enough in there to know that the state of California did not need to be historical experts in caste to know this was a problem. And then finally, of course, we have this BAPS case, which is just a wild case, a religious institution where 5 of the temples across the country, workers have alleged that they've been trafficked to work on this temple doing back-breaking labor, being paid $1 an hour and called things like worm, and not allowed to use the bathroom and having their passports seized. So this is not about one religion. This is really about the rule of law, and it's really about workers' rights, human rights, queer rights, and survivors' rights. Because caste is significantly found across all American institutions at this point, that it's not about denying that it exists. It's about how can we start to use policies and as a community have the reckoning we need around this problem, so we move from denial into adhering to our civil rights obligations. And that's really hard because, dominant caste people have had, centuries of privilege, and they really don't like Dalit people, let alone Dalit women, telling them that they're wrong and they need to make amends. But if we don't do this, the world that we're going to inherit is one where we're seeing unmentionable violence. And that's something that's not a legacy you want to pass on to anyone. And so I think it's so important that we understand that adhering the rule of law now doesn't just protect Dalit workers, it actually protects all workers. And that's why we're here to be able to ask, caste needs to be added as a protected category in every single American institution. And I was really honored to write about the movement that is made up of so many different leaders across the country. And this movement is a juggernaut. It's not stopping. It's only growing. And many of the folks are here that are listening that are from that movement. And we're here on the right side of history, and we want to make sure that we bring everyone along. Even those people that are in bigoted worlds of trauma, we believe that they can be transformed, which is why we're here today.
That's an openness that you have that is much needed today. It's so true what you say that, in terms of those histories of the labor struggles, I think we have heard about these labor struggles in many ways that have talked about kind of the immigration history of the South Asian community coming into as they're coming into the US and what they have been facing. But the question of caste has not been brought up as a core question in any of those struggles. That has been the question that has been missing, I think, that you really rightfully have pointed out. And I think it's so extremely important. And I want to kind of turn to, you talked about using caste as a discrimination category. And, I think given the struggle that you and others have been waging around this, there has been a lot of pushback, right? That there's been a lot of pushback that says, caste is not a thing, that it doesn't exist, or caste discrimination does not exist. And that has, just to speak about perhaps the big word that you have mentioned in the book, is genocide, right? Like there's been calls in India by fundamentalists to calls for genocide against Muslims. There's increasing violence, not that there wasn't enough. There's been increasing violence against Dalit communities and political repression. You talked about this a little bit, of anti-caste Dalit intellectuals, thousands and thousands languishing in jail. And this, of course, has its connections here in the United States, where the struggles that you're talking about. And you've faced so much attacks, and you continue to face these attacks before daring to speak the truth about this and daring to express the fact that caste is an issue in the United States, and to expose the fact that there's misinformation and continued Brahminical lies spread about what the reality is when it comes to South Asians in the US, right? And I just wanted, it would be great if you could talk about this a little bit more about, this task of what we keep talking about is this a task of abolition, right? An abolition of caste, an annihilation of caste, as Dr. Ambedkar said. And how do you organize in this context of just extreme fundamentalism, extreme authoritarianism, and just tremendous attacks that we face, right? When we do this work, how can we bring it into this reality as the ultimate goal in these times of fascism and genocidal calls and religious fundamentalism?
Well, a lot of the times, I struggle just like everybody else does. But I always keep in mind that love is our birthright. Love is our birthright, as is freedom. And, the arc, I always think about how, when I think about who I am an artifact of 1,000 generations of my ancestors' love. And, it is certainly a very difficult time right now, without question. And when I think about what they went through, the extreme deprivation, the outright violence, the dehumanization, there is no way that they would have ever experienced freedom in their lifetime. But hope works like a micro expression in the mind, and, sometimes, it's just a little bit of a dream of freedom is enough to be able to nurture a child that can then carry that dream of freedom down your lineage, right? And I think about how so many of my forebears did that, passed on with love, little by little, until they had, daughters like me and my sister who could be free. And I think that that is a wellspring of hope and ingenuity and possibility that I draw upon even in the darkest times, because we as a species have really evolved to adapt. And I think that while capitalism often tries to portray that the only rule in nature is competition, I think there are also very much many stories of collaboration of species to survive. And this book is really a call for us to listen to this higher call of the species self, and for us to think about collective survival, and for us to move beyond these dominator predator systems that have no vision of a future for us as a people, as a world, in the face of climate catastrophe and the darkening of democracies through to nationalism and fascism around the world. And, you know, in many ways, resistance is both small and large at the same time. You know, a lot of times people want to go right to, okay, I'm going to just go in the streets and I'm going to take on the bad guys, and they haven't done their internal work. You know, and when you haven't done that internal work, you actually don't know where are the places that you still have expansion and possibility, especially because, you know, fascism makes all of our conflicts become much larger, right? And I also want to give out a special shout out to on many of our Indian Muslim kin that are here on this call, because, you know, what Prachi was speaking to in terms of the genocidal project that we're living in right now, it's a tremendous thing because, you know, while there is an Orientalist fantasy of South Asia being like the place where people eat, pray, and love their way to nirvana, the reality is that we're actually the home of multiple genocides, whether it's the Tamil genocide, the Sikh genocide, the violence of partition, or the Bangladeshi genocide, the Rohingyan genocide, and now the Indian genocide against Indian Muslims and other caste oppressed and religious minority peoples. This is a tremendous thing because this genocide is, you know, if it continues in the way that it is, it would be the largest in world history. And we've already lost people to it. We have thousands of people that are political prisoners. We have the human, you know, we have human rights defenders whose homes are being bulldozed. We have an entire society that is held hostage by the trauma worlds of ethno-nationalists that are being driven by irresponsible leaders who don't care what happened to their foot soldiers as they drive us all off a fucking cliff. And yet, even in this dark moment, there are people who always show up to be the light. And that was really what was remarkable to me. And Professor West, I really want to hear your thoughts about this, because one of the things I did in writing this book was I read all of the testimonies from all of the genocides in South Asia. And I don't recommend that. It's not bedtime reading for anyone, but it was important for, you know, but it was important to witness. It was important to witness the lives that were lost. And it was important to witness the sameness of the structures of violence. Like so many of these genocides had the same exact blueprint. And in each of them, the reason why we have testimonies, because there was always someone who said, in the face of death, I'm going to choose life. I'm going to choose my neighbor. I'm going to choose my family member. I'm going to hide them, even if it risks me. I'm going to get them out, even if it does. And I think this is what is so tremendous at this moment, is that the genocidal project in India right now is Brahmanism on steroids. It cares about nobody and nothing. It's just a terrifying engine that is there to eat human lives for profit. And we cannot have only Indian Muslim people who are already under the burden of facing that gun be the only people that are speaking out. And that's also one of the key lessons of this book, is that when you think about caste privileged people and caste oppressed people and religious minority people, they're approaching this tremendous, like, you know, moment very differently. You know, so I see caste oppressed and religious minority people terrified. You know, are people going to come and take my parents? Am I going to be disappeared? You know, will I be put in jail? You know, will I be murdered? You know, do I have to go into a safe house? And then with dominant caste people, I see folks saying, well, this is really bad, but I really don't want to upset people in my family WhatsApp group. These are not the same. And in fact, the children that have to inherit this violence will ask us very harshly, what did you do to stop a genocide? And I think in the face of death, we have a moral responsibility to choose life. And many of us are not able to choose life because we're sitting through the doorway of our discomfort. We're afraid to feel uncomfortable when it comes to examining the wound of caste. But discomfort is really just discomfort. It's a passing state. You can just literally say, I'm uncomfortable, I'm embarrassed, I'm sad, I feel awful. But you walk through that door and you might lose your privilege, but you gain your humanity. And you gain the family and kin that have been removed from you from this terrible system. And that's all that this book is about. It is about de-escalating the nervous systems of all of us who are part of this terrible legacy of caste before we walk and create one of the most bloodiest history, chapters in history. And that's a huge thing to think about. And no one person is going to hold this. It's going to take all of us at this table. And we're going to have to show up with very deep, deep loving hearts and very deep empathetic witness for each other. Because as Professor West talks about, justice is what love looks like in public. Justice doesn't have to be violent. Justice doesn't have to be fierce in a feeling that's outside of yourself. It can be like a lamp that illuminates you and touches everyone around you in a time of deep darkness, because that love is unstoppable. And I think that's really this tremendous moment that we have. And, I'm the writer that I am. This is like my first book, and maybe I didn't always get it all right. And, but, the point is, this is my intention, is to create opening and love for our people at a time when people feel deep despair. And oftentimes the most dangerous moments for society come out of moments of despair, because people feel like there's nothing else, and they'll just watch death all across their path. But I say we can choose life.
Yeah, that's right. We can. And I think the way that, Thenmozhi, thank you so much. And, the way that you talked about the threads, the common threads between the people who have experienced different kinds of genocide, and really bringing that in. There's also a thread of resistance, right? There's the movements and the memories of resistance, whether it's against colonialism or against the caste system for thousands and thousands of years. And those are the movements also that we bring in. And throughout those movements, there was love, right? And throughout those movements, there was healing. And that's why we are here today, that we are. And that's why we've withstood such a tremendous appropriation and a tremendous kind of genocidal project that has been part of our culture for so long. But I have so many questions and so many things that I could talk to you about, but I wanted to bring Dr. West here finally and hear from you, Dr. West, if you could share your thoughts, and we'll go into a question and answer after that.
Well, thank you so much, my dear sister. I don't have words to describe how blessed I am to be here. This is a very, very special event. It's a very, very historic gathering, because what is happening in the Dalit community in this country, in the American Empire, is a fundamental part of the moral and spiritual renaissance that is required. And when I get a chance to see my dear sister, Sister Tia, I tell you, she just enriched my life, so many other lives, because she represents the best of the human spirit. She represents the best of those who have a sensitivity and a genuine care and love for other people who are suffering, vulnerable people. I was blessed to see her precious mother. I just want to salute her mother and her father, because she is a great love warrior. She's one of the greatest love warriors in this country. And a love warrior is someone who is willing to explore the dark corners of one's own soul and to wrestle with what's inside one's own heart, and then to open oneself to a tradition of great folk. Now, I want to point out her book. I'm blessed to have a collector's item here. Can people see it? Can you see those?
We can imagine it because the
Oh,
background.
there you go. There you go. Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Indeed. And I think I'm going to just have a picture of our brother here. I'm just going to have a picture of our brother here, because you're putting a smile on Ambedkar's face. You're putting a smile on Fule's husband and wife, all of the nameless ones. And see, for me, coming from a tradition of a hated people who have produced such love warriors of Black people, that our dear sister puts a face on Fannie Lou Hamer's face, a smile on her face, because Fannie Lou Hamer has a depth of courage that Sister T has. She has a eloquence that Sister T has. We all could listen to Sister T all day, because the wisdom that flows with the brilliant analysis, but also the spirit, the heart, and the embodiment, the enactment of the vision and virtue, the courage and compassion. And so my first question to my dear sister would be, could you say something about your relation to the Black freedom struggle? We've learned so much from you, and I see so much of the Black freedom struggle inside of you, all around you, shot through you. Could you share with the audience here your own reflections on it? Because it comes through in the text in such a beautiful, beautiful way. And it's beyond intersectionality. I mean, I understand Kimberly Crenshaw's analysis and fine, but it's levels of such profound solidarity with the Black, the indigenous, the working class, the queer, internationalism on the one hand, localism on the other. But could you say a word about your relation to my own Black freedom tradition?
Well, it's so interesting, Professor West, because, I think it's both from like a political movement level, but also being a seeker. You know how people talk about being a spiritual seeker?
Right.
I think there was, from a very early age, I wanted to be free in every domain. And I think I told you this, but when I was like 5 years old, I would play, the two games I would play was being in jail, and I would also play being a nun. What 5-year-old plays those games? But it's like, if you think about the spiritual jail that Dalits are in, it's a very kind of like thoughtful thing that a child was trying to work out, right? But for me, I found so much freedom with Black and Indigenous and Latinx women of color mentors who took me under their wing when I was bereft of community. And, I was really like, even before I went to college, my dad had a copy of Stokely Carmichael's Black Power. And I remember reading that in high school. And that was one of the first books that like opened my eyes about thinking about, wait a minute, there's something here. Someone just like rang a little bell in my soul. And then I tried to get all my hands that I could on civil rights, things that I could read. And then when I went to college, I went to school at UC Berkeley, where many of the elders of the Black Panther Party mentored young women of color like me. So you would go to movements and you would have elders that were there. There's also folks that were from the Combahee Collective, like Margot Okazawa Ray and, Linda Burnham and the Women of Color Research Center. And they introduced us to all of these different writings. And when I would go to the South Asian Studies Center, and the scholars there, I just remember knocking on doors. I don't know if you had this experience when you were growing up as one of the first Black professors, you know, being the trailblazer you were, but I just remember knocking on those doors, and those hallways were so empty, and no one would ever pick up the phone or respond. And I would get used to speaking really fast because you'd only have 5 minutes that they would give you, and you had to make your case for being a human, and it still would fail, you know, and it was really hard. It was sad. And I'm crying because I know there's so many students that also have that experience. And
Yeah, yeah.
it was really so many Black peers and also leaders that created space for me. Like, I always remember, like, you know, I'm at Toronto when we're both organizing in Selma, Montgomery. And do you remember that mayor, the one, I forgot his name, Joe something, he called Martin Luther COON.
Exactly, the right wing. Yeah, I do remember him.
He was awful, right? So I was there in my 20s working with Latasha Brown and Tarana, and we were part of that electoral process. And it was the first time I'd seen electoral politics. All of those like young Black women took me in as like a sister, and we saw each other. And Tarana and I talked about what it was like to think about a world where Black and Dalit survivors would be free. And, you know, we were nobody to nobody, but we were everything to each other, you know? And that was everything. And I got to meet Bob Moses because of that work, and, you know, had some, you know, connections with him there. And then of course, like, you know, had so many really beautiful relationships with Malcolm X grass movement folks. And, you know, there's just lots of different places that, you know, I was given beloved community at a time when I was bereft of other context. And then Professor S, I really would be remiss. I was so moved by your writing. And I remember being in college and reading your book, and I was like, I hope one day I will meet this person. And then of course, like, you know, during the Million Man March, we met for 5 minutes running from the police. So it's, you know, I think both having been in deep community with movements and leaders, and also, you know, not even just, it wasn't transactional. Like I worked in their movements, they worked on our movements. So we really had a shared vision of what this looks like in terms of our joint freedom. So I've learned so much and have been so honored to be blessed in this way. And that's the artifact of how we survive in a culture under white supremacy and Brahmanism. We cannot be something that we survive alone. We need each other. We need that beloved community. And it's tremendous when you have it, because it's just to see you as a human and you blossom. And that's why, Professor West, when
I think we lost Thenmozhi for a second. Thenmozhi, are you there?
I think it might be frozen a little bit. It will come right back though.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I want her to continue, but I think it just reminds me, Dr. West, of, you know, we're talking about today's struggle with, you know, with fascism in 1940s was also a time of fascism when Dr. Ambedkar had also written to W.B. Du Bois about the Dalit struggle, and they had an exchange back and forth about this. And I think so much of what Thenmozhi is talking about in terms of these solidarities, or they're reflective of the solidarities that were existing between Black communities and the other communities, even from the 1940s. Thenmozhi, you're back.
Yes, I am back. Thank you guys. Sorry for that internet snafu there.
Yeah,
that's all right. That's all right. But
you know, it was too much bandwidth for the ancestors.
Absolutely. I mean, the spirit is too much for the technology. We know that.
Well, that's why I'm bringing in Dr. Ambedkar because I think Dr. Ambedkar, if he was here today, he would say, I was actually creating these solidarities from even in the 1940s, and it makes sense.
That's exactly right.
About, right? And so, and both times.
Bob Moses right there she was talking about?
Oh my God, yes.
Now, this is a fan from his funeral. I was blessed to give the eulogy for him, but this is a fan from his funeral. But he, like you, Sister T, represents the highest level of what it means to learn from a variety of different freedom struggles, but you're doing it in your time in an unprecedented way in your generation. That's very important because Bob Moses is going all the way back to the 50s and 60s, you know. We're talking about the 21st century. We're talking about the American empire in decline. We're talking about militarism running amok. We're talking about organized greed and hatred that is escalating every day. Neo-fascism's increasing every moment. That's a very different moment than he in the 60s, where the social movement, the progressive social movements were really ascending. See, we were really on the up and up with the Black Panther Party, with Angela Davis, with trade union movement escalation, with the anti-war movement, with young students in privileged places really getting radicalized, which is to say, getting a sense of reality and understanding that they could get out of their bubble of privilege. And so that the excitement of being able to have you with the Equality Lab and all of the other movements that feed into who you are is just it's the greatest sign of hope. It's that candle that we lit at the very beginning, even as the grimness and the bleakness, which is the backdrop of the catastrophes, are increasing. And one of the great mysteries of reality and of history is no matter how bad things get, folk like Sister T keep coming. The love warriors keep fighting. The freedom fighters keep bearing witness. The joy spreaders and the wounded healers refuse to be wounded herders, but wounded healers. And that's where the centrality of love, the love for our precious Dalit brothers and sisters going through all this hell, the love for anybody. It could be Iranian women right now. It could be Palestinians in the West Bank. It could be Jews in France. It could be landless Pellets in Brazil. It can be Roma in Europe. It could be Black folk on the block. It could be indigenous people on the reservation. It could be Latinos in the barrio. That kind of human sensitivity tied to concrete solidarity. That's what we need, and that's what we have. That's why this text is an instant classic. It's a masterpiece because it functions on the intellectual, the spiritual, the political, the economic, with the internationalism grounded in the localism, and at the same time, still with a smile and with style. That's very important. That's Fatty Lou. That's Nina Simone. That's John Coltrane's Love Supreme. That's what keeps us going. And that's why we love you, we respect you, and we thank you for your work and your witness, even though we know, given your humility, you don't like to be cast as ever as an individual. You're always part of a movement, part of a community, part of a tradition, part of a rich legacy. Yes, but at the same time, you are your mama's child and your daddy's daughter. And it's that uniqueness tied to our collectivity that leads us to want to pay tribute to this book, your work, your witness, as we continue to fight together.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Dr. West. And there are so many questions coming in, so I would love to go to them.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Indeed.
So yes, one of the first questions is actually, I think you did bring it up, Dr. West, about intersectionality. So Thenmozhi, the question is, if you could talk about the intersectionality with casteism and gender marginalization, and is there a similarity to gender and race in the Western world? Curious on how we can build solidarity across these intersections.
So, I think for people that are first learning about caste that have joined us today, I think one of the things that is very much specific to how caste works is that caste works by controlling the reproductive function of all genders. And that's because you are born into a caste. So your caste is only as pure as the cis women that help you reproduce your lineage. And so if you do not have a reproductive function in society, you really have, less and less rights, under, what we call Brahminical patriarchy, which is how we talk about, patriarchy in societies that have caste. So there is a lot to really explore with that, because there's punishing caste-based sexual violence, where where caste privileged people use caste oppressed women's bodies to basically control and shame and harm Dalit communities, and and to intimidate them from not stepping outside of the caste apartheid line. But I also think that at a very fundamental level, one of the things that Brahmanism does is that it removes consent in all of the domains of our life. It tells us what we should think. It tells us who we should worship. It tells us who we should marry or not marry. It tells us who gets to have land, who doesn't get to have land. Nothing is of our own domain. And so much of being able to, be caste abolitionists and to annihilate caste requires us to return consent in all relationships and in all of our domains of practice. And that's actually much harder to do. But, again, there's actually a lot of really beautiful shared history between Black and Dalit survivor and movements. So there was this very powerful movement in India that I was lucky to be a small part of, called Dalit Women Fight, where survivors, drove a very powerful march called the Dalit Women Self-Respect March, and the organization that hosted that was AIDMAM, under the National Commission for Dalit Human Rights. And the thing that was so powerful about that process is that, you had women not just speaking to their perpetrators, but to the system that allowed such violence. And when those leaders came to the United States, they met with organizers from Say Her Name. And there was a lot of mutual relationship building about, well, what was the experience of the intergenerational experience of, gender-based violence in the Black community, and how did that connect to, or was similar or different compared to the experience of Dalit survivors? And this conversation even went further when the Black Women's Blueprint had this incredible tribunal at the UN about looking at, hundreds of years of gender-based violence in the Black community. And they drew that line from Rosa Parks' work, because she started before she, worked on the bus boycott. She was there investigating rape as a tool of white supremacy in the South. And so there was a line that was threaded from her work to the incredible violent project of slavery and the reproductive control of Black women and Black families for the purpose of, white theft of bodies and lives. So for me, I think we had a Dalit delegation that went to that, and there was a lot of conversations that came afterwards. And so I think so much of that connection really was, and I think what many Dalit women's movements are fighting for is the right for our crimes to be understood as crimes and for there to be justice. And the pursuit of justice is sometimes the same as healing, but not always. We also need the space to heal from centuries of this violence, because it affects all of the ways that we engage in relationships. It affects the stability of our family. It also, the incredible amount of terror that people have about gender-based violence happening to them when you're a Dalit woman is tremendous. And those are the things that we need to really focus on as we heal. And it's very hard to do this healing when you have dominant caste people denying that caste even exists, let alone the numerous crimes that occur as a result of it. So it is very much a case that you cannot eradicate caste without eradicating patriarchy, and you cannot eradicate patriarchy in our South Asian context without eradicating caste.
That's right. Caste system is actually solidified through endogamy, right? So it is through women's bodies that, that through marriage, we have a saying in my language roti beti vyavahar, which is like the marriage is basically a business between bread and a daughter, right? And so it's really this caste system is really promoted through that, and that's why these are intrinsically connected issues. There are a few questions. I'm going to just maybe pose a couple of more of them because we're at 9:30, and I know there is so much more we could talk about. But there's one question that I wanted to bring in, since we've been talking about fundamentalisms. If you could shine a light on how Hindu fundamentalism and white fundamentalism are connected, or white nationalism are connected, and how we can educate our anti-Trump, Savarna, liberal Hindu community that being pro-Modi is just as problematic. And this is a big issue in the United States. As we know, that a lot of people who are from the Indian community are very anti-Trump, yet they're very pro-Modi. So yeah, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think the thing is that we have to understand that these dominator systems, have been around for a long time. And as we're starting to see a more equal society, there are leadership in those communities who are threatened about the sharing of power. And I think that's where you see the rise of these nationalist movements. They're afraid, like in the United States, what happens when white people become a minority and we're a plurality of peoples. And that's when you start to see so much fragility really kind of, arm conversations where, you have parents who are weaponizing the idea of trauma and saying that if you teach, white children about slavery, that you will traumatize them. And therefore they're passing laws to, saying they need to stop critical race theory or this, that, and the other. But I think that the challenge, I think, with, dominant caste networks in the United States that think that they can be Democrat and progressive in the United States, but then support fascism and genocide, in our homelands. I think that goes back to that casteist mindset where we learn to silo who gets to be in our in-group and who is not human, frankly. And, I think that I was really shocked after Modi won in 2019 that there were people in New Jersey who were saying Rohingyas, tried to steal the election in Bangladesh. And they're coming from Bangladesh and trying to steal it. Why are people in New Jersey talking when using genocidal hate speech like this? Using the term Rohingyas are termites. And we've seen that again, like New Jersey again, where people marched with a bulldozer in the Indian Independence Day parade, as if that's a mark of our country, when in fact it's a mark of genocidal action against human rights defenders. And I think that this is about a moment where we have to recognize people that are in your family networks are actually part of the problem. And this is your time, if you are dominant caste and you are seeing your parents or uncles or aunties, saying bigoted things, coming out and supporting genocidal acts of violence, it's really important that you do everything in your power to de-escalate them. Because I, as a caste oppressed person or someone who's Indian Muslim or Indian Christian, will not have the same proximity of trust to be able to do that work. But the reality is that the nervous systems of the privileged are really primed to believe this disinfo, because it's much easier to believe the disinfo that allows them to grease the way to genocide than actually face the discomfort that they may have been wrong, or that they may have actually benefited from unspeakable violence. That is much harder for the brain to process. And that's why I use the language of trauma, because it's also trauma. Resma Menachem speaks about this, that there is a trauma that lives in white people's bodies that is about the refusal to confront the horrors that have been done in their name. And because of the inability to build tolerance to face that trauma, all replicate cycles of bigotry and violence. Mm-hmm. It too is trauma. And that's why we need to really address it in a meaningful way, because, the trauma worlds of fascists and ethno-nationalists are driving all of our democracies off a cliff. But as Professor West said, there are so many of us that are love warriors. We are the warriors of the light. And one love warrior is worth 10,000 who are entrapped by their trauma and pain. And that's because we're not here to fight them. We're here to bring them back into beloved community. And that's hard. If anyone has ever dealt with someone who's struggling, who is in a cult or been trapped in those cycles, it is very difficult to actually go and do that work. But that is your job right now. You know, your job isn't to go on the front lines and deal with all that mess. Your job is to sit down with your bigoted relative and slow them down and remind them there are connections between us and the earth and each other. And there was that really beautiful story of the Buddha when right before he reached nirvana, all these demons came to him. And what did he do? He sat to the earth. He sat to the earth to connect, not just to the earth energy, but to the species and to life around it. And when you remind someone who's so deeply traumatized that there is a law of life, that there can still be love and connection, transformation can occur. And you have to, you know, this is a kind of a thing where you have to fake it till you make it. You know, it is really terrifying to deal with bigoted relatives. I understand. And yet, if you don't try, who will? That's why the love is the most potent tool that we have right now. And it's scary and it's terrifying, but you know what? So is genocide. So is the hearings that come after genocide. So is picking up the bones and cleaning up the blood and the aftermath of mass atrocity. That is much harder than to do the work that we can do right now with each other. And really, if there's anything that you walk away from this book, it's to take action to choose life every single day. Because to fight against genocide is one of the highest battles we can take towards life.
Yes, thank you for that. And I think you have also talked about in this book that there actually is a lot of hope in this. There are a lot of people within our communities who are also dominant castes, who are participating in these multi-caste, intercaste, interfaith, multiracial struggles. You know, if it's your work with the Santa Clara Human Rights Commission and all the different things that you've talked about is you know, with the work that you've done in terms of the political education to bring people into kind of unlearning the castes. You know, what does it mean to unlearn the thousands of years of Brahminization, and how do we get to de-Brahminization as we get to decolonization? And these are the questions that I know we have talked about Thenmozhi for so long, and I think some of these struggles, this work of de-Brahminization has been part of that, and that's why it's heartening to see that there's so many people who have joined the struggle. There's so many people who are on this call today who have done that, who have been part of the struggle, and that's what needs to just grow and grow and grow. And I see hope in that. I see hope in what you're saying. I see hope in what Dr. West has been bringing us today. There is empathy and embrace and just openness to expand the struggle and bring it to what it needs to be, because what we face is just tremendous. And for it to face that tremendous and horrendous kind of the task is so huge that we need more of us in the struggle. And more of us means it needs to be multi-caste, it needs to be intercaste, it needs to be multiracial, and it needs to be multi-religious. And this is how we're going to fight this. So I think I'm going to have to stop it there. We're at 9:41. There are a lot of struggle. There's a lot of questions coming in, Thenmozhi, still. And, you know, I think I know you're doing many other book talks as well, and there'll be many opportunities. So hope you all can participate in those. I hope you get this book. I still have my collector's edition, as Dr. West has said, but I hope you all have ordered your copy and, you know, read the book, engage with it, have study groups, you know, reading circles, and ask questions and talk to each other, and join the struggle, most importantly. And I will meet you there, right? Thank you, Thenmozhi. Thank you, Dr. West.
Thank you.
Rahim.
Wonderful,
Thank you.
wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you. We did it. We did it. Woo!
10%. Wow.
And And Professor West, I didn't get a chance to finish my story about how you opened your door to me, but I wanted to tell that story because there are so many Dalit students that aren't lucky enough to have a professor like you create that empathetic witness. And every student that you mentor and you open a door, you don't know what pain they carry in their heart, but each one is a seed that can grow in that powerful revolutionary plant, right? And I can't thank you enough for believing in me and supporting so many Dalits like myself. Like we really, hit the jackpot with someone like you as our elder. So thank you, Professor West.
Well, thank you. To see you honor my mother and my father saying that, I tell you.
Well, they need to know that their son has done good, sprouting revolution in so many movements, Professor West.
But I say the same thing about both of you all, but especially this historic gathering today. This was really so powerful, so uplifting, illuminating, and empowering, and you can just feel the tradition, and that's always the criteria, that you can just feel the best of the ancestors and traditions coming through us. Mm-hmm. Or as we say in the Black church, just allowing the Lord to use us.
Yes.
And that's what happened tonight. That's what happened. We thank you so very much, Sister Prachi. We really do. You did a marvelous job. Sister T is just, the wisdom and eloquence just flows, vision analysis. It's a beautiful thing to behold. It's a beautiful thing to behold. It really is. Good God. So any other support I can be or any other subsequent parents, let me